Hello, Health 230 students. This is Brian Clark. Today I will be lecturing on chapter number 9, weight management. This is lecture 1 of 2. In this first lecture, I'm going to be talking rather generally about how weight is gained and how weight is lost. And in my opinion, this first lecture is much more important to your ability to communicate effectively with patients. Yes, in the second lecture, I'm going to be going over some very specific information about hormones, things like ghrelin and leptin and their effect on the body. And yes, that information is important, but what's much more important, in my opinion, is to be able to give patients useful information. So oftentimes when you talk about specifics, you're just talking over their head. But when you talk in broad, general terms, people can understand that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to convey information to you in a manner that I feel is appropriate to communicate to the general population. And I hope that you'll put some of this in your back pocket and use it in the future. First and foremost, people need to understand that being normal is not necessarily being healthy. So oftentimes people think if they are eating in the manner that they see other people, or eating in what they consider to be a normal fashion, that is okay, when in reality it is not. Feel free to navigate out to CNN Fit Nation, and there you will find this map. It's I think if you search for growing waist lines, you should be able to find this rather easily. But if we go back to 1985, we see that all of these states that are shown in gray had less than 10% of their population being obese. The states that are shown in kind of this baby blue, 10 to 14% of their population was considered obese. Now, admittedly, we didn't have data on everyone, but very quickly we do have data on almost everyone, or almost all states. And you'll see that once we do have much better data, we can see that still, just a few years later, that most states are falling in this somewhere between 10 to 14% range, and less than 10% range. But only very few states, it's at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, only 8 states back in 1991 had less than 10% of their population in the obese category. The majority of them were in this 10 to 14% range. We go to 1995, and you'll see a very big change between 1991 and 1995. Very quickly, you see basically the eastern half of the United States falling into this 15 to 19% category, with the remainder of the states being in the 10 to 14% category. We go to 1997. We see that pattern continuing. Go to 2001, and we see a fairly major change there. Basically, the eastern half of the U.S. has 1 in 4, or between 20 and 24% of their population as being obese, and only Colorado, only Colorado still had between 10 and 14% of its population in the obese category. Then we go to 2004. We see the situation worsening. And finally to 2006, and this is the most recent data that we have, we see that once again basically the eastern half of the U.S. is not doing very well in this scenario, or in this case in 2006. All of those states that you see in the rust color, they had basically 1 in 4, 25 to 30% of their population in the obese category. And Mississippi, Alabama, and West Virginia had greater than 30% of their population in the obese category. Now, I think that you can see very quickly that there is a very distinct trend over a rather short period of time, and it's pretty safe to say what that trend is. We as a society, we are very quickly becoming significantly overweight. Here you'll see the same information, but this is the information that comes directly from your text. Ultimately, the causes of obesity still come down to caloric imbalance. Yes, we do have these genetic predispositions, but evolutionarily speaking, it makes good sense why some people are low in leptin, for example, and that's a appetite suppressing hormone, and why some people have excess amounts of ghrelin. During the majority of the existence of human beings, there's been kind of a feast or famine type of conditions on a regular basis, and those people that had the ability to store large amounts of fat, well, there was a competitive advantage for those people. And now that we live in a society where there really is not a need to have excess amounts of body fat, because we don't have those famine times now like our predecessors did, we have a tendency to progressively gain weight. But ultimately, regardless of these genetic predispositions or leptin deficiency or too much ghrelin circulating in our blood, ultimately body weight is determined by caloric balance, the amount of energy that's coming in versus the amount of energy that's going out. If we are eating more calories, aka energy, than we are burning off, then we're going to gain weight. Now let's look at a rather simplistic example. Here you see someone putting gasoline into an automobile. We understand very clearly that as we put gasoline into an automobile, that is fuel or energy being placed into the gas tank, and there's only a finite or specific amount of energy that we can put in. Once the tank is full, that's it. Our bodies, not the same way. Our bodies, they have an unlimited fuel tank, or at least somewhat unlimited fuel tank. And our body can just continue storing more and more energy by allowing fat cells to grow larger and larger. Not only do we have our energy stores in our body, but we also have engines. Some engines are bigger than others, or some people's engines are bigger than others. Here you see a photo of an absolutely enormous engine. This is an engine that goes into a cargo ship. This company in Japan, they make engines specifically for cargo ships, and as you can see, those engines are absolutely massive in size. And as you can well imagine, that massive engine uses massive amounts of fuel. Now, the amount that it can use at any given time can vary depending upon the intensity of the work that it's doing. Another way of thinking about that is you can say the amount of energy or amount of fuel that it uses depends on how much throttle is being given at a given time. At a given time. Now here you see a much smaller engine. This is an automobile engine, and comparatively, this engine is much smaller than this engine. It still uses fuel, regardless of whether it's idling or whether a person has the accelerator to the floor, but it uses much less. The reason I like to bring that to a person's attention is because we do have some variations in the amount of fuel that we burn. Some people can burn more than others because some people carry more muscle mass than do other people. Our engine is our muscle mass. Now, yes, admittedly, we do have some other things in our body that utilize energy, things like the brain, even the intestines, the smooth muscle tissue in the intestines utilizes energy. But primarily, the amount of energy that we use in a given day is determined by the amount of muscle mass that we the amount of muscle mass that we have, and how much we use that muscle mass. So, if it truly is as simple as knowing how much energy first and foremost goes into the body, just like gasoline going into a fuel tank, and knowing how much energy is expended or how much gasoline is used, then you and I should be able to calculate that and make a very quick determination as to whether or not a person is in a caloric surplus, meaning they're bringing more calories in or more energy into their body than they're burning off, or whether they're in a caloric deficit where they are burning off more calories than they're bringing in. And I talked about this in the last lecture, that it is my very distinct recommendation that people who are attempting to lose weight, that they utilize a heart rate monitor with a caloric estimation function. Because these devices, they do a very good job of estimating caloric expenditure. And if we know the amount of energy that we are utilizing, and then we can utilize use a dietary analysis software such as Diet Analysis Plus, or any one of the multitude of softwares out there that estimates caloric intake, and we just compare those two numbers. We look at energy in versus energy out, then very quickly we start gaining some perspective, or a patient starts gaining some perspective as to whether or not on a given day they are in a caloric surplus or whether they're in a caloric debt. And for a person to lose weight, they have to be in a caloric deficit. And I just a moment ago I accidentally said debt. I meant to say deficit, whether or not a person is in a caloric deficit. So by gaining that perspective over time, a person doesn't necessarily have to wear a heart rate monitor to know approximately where that caloric balance is. I personally, I don't need a heart rate monitor to know whether or not I am overeating in a given day, because I have utilized a heart rate monitor so much during my lifetime, and I've done so many dietary analyses that I would say that probably 90-95% of the time I could tell you whether or not I am bringing in more calories than I'm using, or whether I am bringing in fewer calories than I'm using in a given day. And once a person comes to that epiphany and realizes how much energy is in the food that they eat and how much energy is being expended through physical activity, very quickly a person becomes empowered to manage his or her body weight. So it's my hope that you can use these types of analogies with patients and convey information to them in general terms that they can understand and ultimately can apply to their own lives. All right, thank you for your attention today.